That's what I heard the first time I met my daughter-in-law's parents. The words sliced through the air like a knife. I smiled anyway, pretending not to notice. It was a Saturday afternoon in Texas. My son, Ethan, had been dating Jessica for a year. She was polite, educated, from a good family, as people liked to say. They invited me for lunch, an introduction before the wedding. I wore my best floral dress, the one I'd ironed twice, and carried a small gift basket of homemade cookies. When I arrived, the first thing Jessica's mother, Diane, did was look me up and down. "Ethan didn't tell us you lived out there," she said, her tone polite but her face tight. Out there meant my small rented house on the edge of town. Her husband, Greg, just grunted. The house smelled like expensive candles and judgment. Jessica smiled awkwardly and said, "Mom, please." But Diane interrupted. No, I just meant we weren't expecting someone so simple." I wanted to crawl out of my skin, but I smiled again. "It's okay," I said softly. "I'm used to simple." Inside, I was shaking. My hands were sweating around the cookie basket, but I forced myself to sit and stay calm. I knew how rich people behaved when they thought they were better than you. I'd been poor most of my life. My husband died when Ethan was 12. I worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and serving breakfast at a diner, just to make sure he could finish college. Now he was an engineer. Successful. Kind. My only pride in this world. And these people were treating me like I was a burden. As we ate, Diane bragged about their vacation home in Florida, their daughter's Ivy League network, their connections. Every sentence was a reminder that I didn't belong. When she asked, "What do you do these days, Mrs. Miller?" I answered honestly. "I take care of some kids from my neighborhood after school. Helps with the bills." "Oh," she said, tilting her head with a pitying smile. "That's sweet. Sweet. Like I was some charity case." Ethan noticed my silence and reached for my hand under the table. But I pulled it back. I didn't want him to defend me. Not yet. I wanted to see how far they would go. Then came the moment that still burns in my mind. When the meal ended, Greg said, "Jessica will take care of the wedding expenses, but let's keep it classy, all right? We don't want surprises." Diane nodded toward me. "Yes. Let's just make sure everything looks proper." Jessica turned red. "Mom, stop it." But it was too late. I'd already made my decision. I smiled one last time and said, "Don't worry, Diane. I won't embarrass you." They laughed awkwardly. They thought I was harmless. They thought I was poor and naive. But what they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the papers in my purse weren't grocery lists or bills. They were ownership papers for a company I'd quietly built over 15 years. A cleaning service that now had government contracts, 27 employees, and more savings than Diane's Florida vacation home was worth. I hadn't told anyone, not even Ethan, because I wanted him to learn humility first. But that day, their arrogance lit something inside me. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I was going to show them who I really was, but in my own time, in my own way. When I left that house, I caught my reflection in their front door's glass. For the first time in years, I didn't see a tired widow. I saw a woman with keys to her own destiny. When I got home that night, I sat in the dark for a long time. The air smelled like rain and detergent. My hands were still trembling from how small they made me feel. But more than hurt, I felt insulted. I kept replaying Diane's words in my head. Simple. Poor. Out there. I'd been called worse before, but this time was different. Because they weren't just insulting me. They were insulting the woman who raised their future son-in-law. And the truth? They were testing me. They wanted to see if I'd bend my head and accept their pity. I decided I would play along, just long enough to learn who they really were. Over the next few weeks, Jessica came over to visit me a few times. She was sweet, nervous, and I could tell she didn't share her parents' arrogance. She even apologized once. "I'm so sorry about how my mom spoke that day," she said quietly. "She can be traditional." "Traditional?" I smiled. "Honey, I've met traditional. Your mom's just mean." Jessica laughed, but there was guilt in her eyes. "I'll talk to her," she promised. But I knew better. People like Diane didn't change. They just hid their contempt behind smiles. Ethan, bless him, tried to ignore the tension. He was caught between his love and his mother. He didn't know how to fix it, so he focused on work, on wedding planning, on being the bridge between two worlds. My world and theirs. And then came the rehearsal dinner. It was held at a fancy restaurant in downtown Dallas. White tablecloths. Soft piano. Waiters who looked like they could model in magazines. I wore a navy blue dress I'd bought years ago for a friend's funeral. Simple but neat. Diane, on the other hand, looked like she was attending a royal gala. Her jewelry alone could have paid my rent for 6 months. When I walked in, she leaned toward her friend and whispered, not quietly enough, "She's really trying, isn't she?" That's when I realized something. I wasn't just dealing with arrogance. I was dealing with humiliation as sport. Greg raised a toast halfway through dinner. "To family," he said. "And to new beginnings. Let's all hope our families blend as smoothly as possible." Then he turned to me with a smirk. "I'm sure Mrs. Miller will adjust well to our ways." The table chuckled. I didn't. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'm sure I will. I've adjusted to harder things than this." You could have heard a pin drop. Ethan froze. Jessica looked mortified. And Diane's smile twitched. When I got home that night, I went to my office, the small converted room at the back of my house that most people thought was just storage. But inside were files, invoices, and contracts, proof of 15 years of hard work. My cleaning business, Miller Facility Services, wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. And just last week, I'd been offered a partnership deal with a logistics company that wanted long-term maintenance contracts across 3 states. All under my name. But that night, as I flipped through the papers, I wasn't thinking about business. I was thinking about legacy. About respect. If my son was marrying into a family that only valued wealth, then I'd show them real power, quiet, earned, and unstoppable. 2 days later, I met my lawyer, Mr. Harlan. He'd been with me since my first government contract. "I want to transfer temporary ownership of the company to Ethan," I said. He frowned. "You sure? That's a big step." "I just want the paperwork done quietly," I explained. "It's still mine legally, but I want his name to show as managing partner." He nodded slowly. "You're planning something, aren't you?" I smiled. "Let's just say, I want to see how people treat him when they think I'm not worth much." The next weekend, Diane called me, out of nowhere. "Hi, Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We're thinking of having a small brunch before the wedding. Would you like to come?" I almost laughed. Now she wanted me there. But I said yes, because I knew this time I'd be ready. I took my old car, the one with a missing hubcap, and wore my faded cardigan again. I wanted to look exactly like the woman they thought I was. But in my purse, along with my wallet, were new documents. Ethan's name listed as managing partner of Miller Facility Services, LLC. And I had a plan that would turn their fake smiles into silence. Diane said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. We were sitting at her dining table again, this time surrounded by her friends, 3 women in pearls and perfume, sipping mimosas like they were at some charity brunch. I froze for a second, then smiled. "Maybe you're right," I said. "But my son loves your daughter. That's all that matters, right?" One of her friends snickered. "Love is sweet, but money pays the bills." They laughed together, like I wasn't even sitting there. I'd been insulted before, but something about their smug little circle burned deeper than usual. Because I knew something they didn't. I could buy and sell this table 10 times over. Still, I played along. I nodded, asked polite questions, complimented the house. I wanted them comfortable, unguarded. When I excused myself to use the restroom, I passed through their hallway. Photos lined the wall, Jessica's graduation, their lake house, family vacations in Italy. I noticed Diane's office door slightly open. Inside, I caught a glimpse of files and invoices spread out. One of them had a familiar logo, a local business I recognized. My cleaning company handled their corporate offices. I paused, staring. That meant Diane's husband's firm was our client. I walked back to the table calmly, but inside, my mind was racing. Their company, Greystone Holdings, had been late on payments twice last year. I remembered signing off on the follow-up notices myself. I'd kept it professional, never intervened directly. But now I had leverage, not for revenge, but for respect. When the brunch ended, Diane handed me a small envelope. "It's a little something for the wedding," she said sweetly. I opened it later in my car. A check for $500. It wasn't generosity. It was pity. I folded it neatly and tucked it in my glove compartment. Then I called my accountant. "I need Greystone Holdings flagged for review," I said. "There were delays last year. Send a formal audit notice." He hesitated. "You want me to send it directly?" Yes, I said. Attention, Gregory Turner. That was Diane's husband. 3 days later, I got a call. It was Greg, his tone suddenly respectful. Mrs. Miller, this is Greg Turner. I believe there's been some misunderstanding with our maintenance contract. No misunderstanding, I said. Just a standard compliance audit. Nothing personal. He cleared his throat. Right, well, we'd appreciate if you could handle it discreetly. I always do, I replied. When I hung up, I smiled for the first time in days. Because now the balance had shifted. At the wedding rehearsal, Diane's attitude softened, just a little. She smiled more, asked polite questions about my babysitting job, and even complimented my earrings. But I saw it in her eyes. She was nervous. She must have known the audit was serious. And she didn't know that the poor, naive mother, sitting in front of her, was the woman signing the invoices her husband depended on. That night, Ethan came home worried. Mom, are you sure you're okay with all this tension? Jessica's been upset about her parents. I nodded. Son, let them be who they are. People show their true colors when they think no one's watching. He hugged me. You're the strongest person I know. He didn't realize how strong I was about to become. 2 weeks later, the audit revealed what I suspected. Greystone Holdings had misreported maintenance costs. My company had been overbilled for services never received. Legally, I could have pursued penalties. But instead, I called Greg personally. Mr. Turner, I said calmly, I'm willing to settle this quietly, but I'd like to discuss a few conditions. He hesitated. Conditions? Yes. You'll formalize a new service contract at the updated rate, and you'll attend the wedding reception with your family without making anyone feel small. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, Understood. When the wedding day arrived, I wore a simple cream gown with a gold brooch my husband had given me years ago. Nothing fancy, but it carried history, love, strength. The ceremony was beautiful. Jessica looked radiant. Ethan couldn't stop smiling. And when I walked into the reception hall, Diane came up to me with that same forced smile. But this time, she hugged me. I'm glad you could make it, Mrs. Miller, she said. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I replied. She didn't know the world she'd tried to humiliate was already under my name. As I looked around the hall, the chandeliers, the flowers, the laughter, I thought of the night I'd cried alone, thinking I was powerless. Now I knew better. Silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. It happened 2 weeks after the wedding. I was sitting on my porch one evening, sipping tea, when a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Out stepped Diane, perfectly dressed as always, but her expression wasn't the usual smug confidence. It was tight, almost nervous. I stood up slowly. Diane, this is a surprise. She smiled thinly. I needed to talk to you. Privately. I gestured toward the porch chair. Go ahead. She hesitated, brushing off invisible dust from her designer skirt before sitting. Greg told me about your company, she said finally. Miller Facility Services. I kept my face calm. Yes. What about it? She looked at me sharply. You own it. I nodded once. I do. Her laugh was short and bitter. So this entire time, you just let us believe you were some poor babysitter? I took a slow sip of tea. I didn't let you believe anything. You decided what you wanted to see. For a moment, she was silent. The sound of crickets filled the space between us. Then she sighed, looking away. Greg is furious. The audit nearly cost him his position. I raised an eyebrow. He should be grateful. I didn't file penalties. Her jaw tightened. You embarrassed us. I smiled slightly. No, Diane. You embarrassed yourself. I just stopped pretending I didn't notice. She glared at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look powerful. She looked afraid. You're not the woman I thought you were, she said quietly. I leaned forward. You're right. I'm not. I'm the woman you never saw coming. When she left, I felt lighter. Not triumphant, just free. Because I finally understood that power doesn't come from shouting or money or even revenge. It comes from standing your ground when others expect you to bow. Still, I knew people like Diane didn't just disappear quietly. And I was right. A week later, Ethan came to visit. His face looked troubled. Mom, he said carefully, did you do something to Jessica's parents' company? I blinked. Why? He hesitated. Greg mentioned something about an audit and contracts being canceled. Jessica's been crying. They think you targeted them. I set my tea down. Did Jessica tell you what her parents said to me before the wedding? He looked confused. Not really. Why? I took a deep breath. They treated me like dirt, Ethan. They humiliated me in front of their friends. They called me poor, unfit, a mistake. He went pale. They what? I didn't tell you before because I didn't want to ruin your wedding, I said softly. But they crossed a line. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. God, Mom. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I smiled sadly. It's not your fault, son. Sometimes people have to be reminded that kindness isn't weakness. He nodded slowly. What are you going to do now? I looked out toward the street where Diane's SUV had parked days earlier. Nothing, I said. My part's done. The rest is theirs to carry. But life wasn't done testing me. 2 days later, I received a legal letter, from Greystone Holdings' attorney. A formal complaint alleging malicious interference and defamation. My hands trembled as I read it. They were trying to sue me. I sat on my couch for an hour, staring at the papers. I'd thought I was done fighting, but apparently, Diane's pride couldn't let go. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, Mr. Harlan. He listened quietly, then said, "They're bluffing. But if they want a fight, we'll give them one." A few days later, we met in his office downtown. The air smelled like leather and old paper. Harlan laid out the documents. "Here's what they don't realize," he said, tapping one page. "We have every contract, every invoice, every email. You've done everything by the book. They're wasting their money." I sighed. I don't want a war. I just wanted respect. He smiled. "Then we'll end this fast." We filed a counterclaim the same day, for damages and harassment. By the next week, their attorney reached out for settlement talks. The meeting was surreal. We sat in a glass conference room, me, my lawyer, Greg, and Diane. Greg looked uncomfortable. Diane looked furious. Their attorney tried to stay neutral. After an hour of back and forth, the lawyer finally asked, "Mrs. Miller, what outcome would satisfy you?" I looked directly at Diane. "An apology. That's all." She stiffened. "You're joking." "I'm not," I said calmly. "You humiliated me. You insulted my son's upbringing. You tried to destroy my reputation. I don't want your money. I want your words." Greg muttered under his breath. "Just say it, Diane." She glared at me, eyes full of resentment. Then, finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry." "Louder," I said quietly. "For the record." Her voice trembled. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "Then we're done here." As I walked out of that room, I caught my reflection in the glass door. Same woman, but a different soul. The woman who'd once accepted humiliation now demanded respect. The woman they thought was poor and naive now stood taller than their pride ever would. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't revenge. It was justice, simple, quiet, and complete. That's what Diane said to me outside the courthouse, her voice trembling with rage. Her lipstick was perfect, but her hands shook as she clutched her purse. I could tell she wasn't used to losing, especially not to someone she once called simple. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, calm and steady. "It was never a competition," I said. "It was a lesson." Her face twisted. "You humiliated my family." I shook my head. "No, Diane. You did that when you chose arrogance over kindness." She wanted to say more, but Greg put a hand on her arm. "Enough," he muttered, guiding her toward their car. As they drove away, I finally exhaled. Months of tension, gone in seconds. But peace doesn't come free. It comes after you stop apologizing for your strength. That night, Ethan came over with Jessica. I didn't know what to expect. Would she resent me for what happened? For forcing her parents to apologize publicly? But when she walked through the door, she hugged me. Tight. Longer than I expected. "I didn't know half of what they did to you," she said quietly. "I'm so sorry, Mom." That was the first time she called me Mom. It broke something open inside me. For months, I'd been fighting this silent war alone. And now, hearing that word, it made everything worth it. Ethan smiled. "I think they finally understand who they were dealing with." I chuckled. "Took them long enough." Jessica laughed softly. "My mom's been quiet ever since that meeting. She told her friends she had to reevaluate some relationships." "That's a fancy way of saying she's embarrassed," I said. We all laughed. But deep down, I didn't feel proud. I felt relieved. Because it was over. Or so I thought. A few weeks later, my accountant called. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "there's something you need to see." He emailed me a document. It was a copy of a new business filing, a competitor company. And guess who had registered it? Diane Turner. She'd used a different name, Turner Elite Cleaning Services. The same service industry. The same client list style. A direct copy of mine. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, stunned. Then I laughed. Of course, I muttered. She's not done yet. I called my lawyer. Harlan, can she do that? He sighed. Technically, yes, unless she's infringing on your branding or contracts. But if she starts poaching clients, that's a violation. Oh, she'll try, I said. Trust me. He paused. What are you going to do? I smiled. Nothing. Not yet. Because I knew Diane. She wasn't patient. She'd move fast, and when she did, she'd leave proof. 2 weeks later, I got an email from one of our oldest clients, a government facility in Austin. They wrote, "We received a call from a new vendor offering premium services and claiming to have taken over Miller Facilities staff. We just wanted to confirm if that's true." Bingo. I asked for the name of the caller. It was one of Diane's new hires. She'd poached 2 of my cleaners, both of whom had signed non-compete agreements. I didn't have to lift a finger. She'd handed me her mistake. I forwarded the email to Harlan with a note. Let's proceed. A week later, Diane received a cease and desist letter. Her business was finished before it even started. She called me furious. "You're vindictive," she screamed over the phone. "No," I said quietly. "I'm professional. There's a difference. You think you're better than me?" "I don't have to think it," I said. "You proved it for me." And I hung up. For a while, things went quiet. Ethan and Jessica moved into their new home. My business kept growing. We landed 2 new federal contracts. Life felt peaceful again. But sometimes peace doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like silence after a storm, heavy, still, and earned. I'd fought battles most people never saw, not with fists, but with patience. And for the first time in years, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman who didn't flinch anymore. The mirror didn't show wrinkles or gray hair that night. It showed survival, strength, dignity. I whispered to my reflection, "You did it, Mary. You finally did it." That weekend, Jessica invited me for dinner. Her parents were supposed to be there, but they didn't come. I asked why. Jessica smiled sadly. "They're moving to Florida. Starting over, I think." I nodded. "Good for them." Ethan looked at me. "Do you forgive them?" I thought about it for a long moment. "Forgive, yes. Forget, never." He smiled softly. "That sounds like you." That night, as I locked my front door, I paused with the keys in my hand. I remembered the first time I'd stood in that doorway. Humiliated, small, invisible. Now, that same door felt like a symbol. It wasn't just my home anymore. It was the place where I rebuilt myself. I turned off the lights, ready to rest, but my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You may have won this round, but it's not over." No name, no context, but I didn't need one. I just smiled, put the phone down, and whispered, "Oh, Diane, it's been over for a long time." That was the next thing Diane told me. Not directly, but through the voice of gossip. A week after that strange text, I started hearing things. A few clients called confused, asking if I was under investigation. One of them even said, "A woman named Diane told us your company might be in legal trouble." Legal trouble. It was a lie, of course. But rumors spread fast, faster than truth. At first, I brushed it off. But when I lost 2 contracts in the same week, I knew she was back at it. I didn't cry this time. I didn't panic. I just poured myself a cup of coffee and started making notes. Diane Turner, I wrote at the top of the page. Objective, silence her lies. I called my old contact at the County Business Bureau, a woman named Patricia. She owed me a favor from the time I helped clean up her community center for free after a flood. "Patty," I said, "I think someone's spreading false claims about my company. I need to know who's been filing complaints." She sighed. "Give me a day." By the next morning, she emailed me 3 complaint forms, all anonymous but all written in the same phrasing. Miller Facility Services engages in improper labor practices. It was laughable. We paid above market rates, offered benefits, and had 0 violations on record. But the handwriting, the looping Y, the slanted R, I recognized it. Diane. That was her new game. Ruin me quietly. I drove to Austin the next day, walked straight into the local labor office, and requested a meeting with the compliance officer. I showed every inspection report, every payment record, every signed affidavit from my staff. By the end of the meeting, the officer shook my hand. "Mrs. Miller, you run one of the cleanest operations we've seen. Whoever's doing this is wasting our time." "Then make that official," I said. "Publicly." He smiled. "Gladly." By Friday, they released a formal statement clearing my company of any wrongdoing. I emailed that statement to every client we had. And just like that, the calls stopped. Contracts reinstated. Reputation stronger than before. But I didn't stop there. I wanted Diane to feel what I'd felt, not through destruction, but through isolation. 2 months later, her company quietly folded. She'd lost her only investor, Greg. They were living apart now. Jessica told me in confidence one evening, Mom and Dad are getting divorced. She's been impossible since everything happened. I put my hand on hers. I'm sorry, honey. She shook her head. Don't be. Maybe she needs to face who she's become. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same woman who tried to destroy me was now being eaten alive by her own pride. Still, I couldn't celebrate. Something inside me had changed since all this began. Revenge used to feel sharp, like fire. Now it just felt heavy. I'd proved my point, but at what cost? One evening, while reviewing payroll, I found myself staring at an old photograph. Ethan as a little boy, holding my hand outside our first rental home. We were both smiling, tired but happy. Back then, I never cared who respected me. I just cared that he was safe. When did that change? When did I start fighting for recognition from people who didn't deserve my attention? I closed the file and whispered to myself, "You've already won. Let it go." The next morning, I did something unexpected. I drove to Diane's house. Her car was gone, but she was there, sitting on the porch in sweatpants, hair messy, face tired. No jewelry. No arrogance. When she saw me, her eyes widened. "What do you want now?" I sat down beside her, leaving a gap between us. "Nothing," I said. "I came to say I forgive you." She laughed bitterly. "You forgive me?" "Yes," I said simply. "Because I don't want to carry you anymore. You've lived rent-free in my head long enough." She stared at me like she didn't understand the language I was speaking. Then she looked away, her voice breaking. "I lost everything." I nodded. "So did I once." That's how I learned what mattered. She didn't respond. And I didn't need her to. I stood up, walked back to my car, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt peace. Real peace. That night, Ethan called. "Mom, Jessica told me you went to see her mother." "I did." He paused. "Why?" "Because strength isn't about winning, son," I said softly. "It's about knowing when to stop fighting." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You amaze me." I smiled. "No, honey. I just learned the hard way that women like us don't need to prove our worth. We just need to live it." Later that night, I looked in the mirror again. Same woman. Same eyes. But this time I saw no anger. No fear. Just calm. I whispered. They said I didn't belong in their circle. Turns out I never wanted to. And then I turned off the light. Ethan said that to me one evening while helping me sort some old files in my office. He looked at the faded folders stacked on the table. Years of contracts, bills, letters, and receipts. My life's proof that survival wasn't a story, it was a record. Stronger? I laughed softly. I just survived, that's all. He shook his head. No, you built something. From nothing. And you didn't just survive, Mom. You outsmarted people who thought you were beneath them. That made me pause. Because deep down, I still saw myself as that woman standing in Diane's living room. Smiling through humiliation, holding a cookie basket like it was a shield. But Ethan was right. Somewhere along the way, that woman had changed. After Diane's downfall, life felt normal again. Calm. Predictable. But the truth is, after fighting so long, peace can feel almost strange. I started waking up early. Not to stress, not to plan revenge, but just to walk. Every morning, I'd pass by the same coffee shop, the same park bench, the same bakery where the owner, Ms. Parker, always waved from behind the counter. It felt like reclaiming the ordinary. Then one morning, she stopped me. "You're Mary Miller, right?" she asked. "The lady who runs that big cleaning company?" I smiled. "That's me." She nodded. "Would you talk to my niece sometime? She's been struggling to find her footing after a bad divorce. She could use some encouragement." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. For so long, I'd fought battles alone. But what if my story could help someone else? So I agreed. The next day, I met her niece, a quiet woman named Rachel, maybe in her late 30s. She'd lost her job, her home, and most of her confidence. She told me her husband used to tell her she was lucky to have him. The same kind of words that shrink you little by little until you forget who you were before the hurt. I listened for an hour before saying anything. Then I told her everything, about Ethan, about Diane, about the humiliation, the lawsuits, the forgiveness. When I finished, she was crying. I wish I had your courage, she whispered. I smiled gently. You already do. You just haven't used it yet. That small conversation changed something in me. For years, my pain had been personal. Now it felt like a purpose. I started meeting other women through community events, single mothers, divorced wives, women who'd been told they were too old, too weak, too much trouble. We started gathering every Saturday at my office after work. It began as casual talk, but soon it became something bigger. We called it the second door, because sometimes life slams one in your face, and you have to build another. Diane didn't know it, but the woman she tried to humiliate had accidentally sparked something powerful. A chain of women who refused to stay silent anymore. I saw myself in every one of them. The tired eyes, the forced smiles, the quiet shame of being underestimated. But week after week, those eyes changed, growing sharper, braver. We helped each other write resumes, file business licenses, apply for grants. One woman started her own catering business. Another went back to school. Every story was a victory. And slowly, people began to notice. A local newspaper reached out for an interview about women in small business. At first, I declined. I wasn't looking for attention. But then I remembered all the women who sat in my office sharing their fears. So I said yes. The article came out with the headline, "From Cleaning Floors to Opening Doors, How One Woman Built a Second Chance." It went viral in our small town. And for the first time, people didn't see me as poor Mary from the outskirts. They saw me as a leader. I wasn't chasing power anymore. It had quietly found me. A month later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in delicate handwriting. Inside was a short note. You were right. I needed to face who I'd become. Thank you for forgiving me. Diane. I sat there holding that letter for a long time. It didn't make me happy. It didn't make me angry. It just made me feel complete. Because forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was closure. That evening, Ethan and Jessica came over for dinner. After we ate, Jessica pulled out her phone and said, "Mom, look at this." It was a Facebook post from her mother. Diane had shared a link to the article about me. Her caption read, "Some people teach you lessons. Others are the lesson." I met both and learned to respect the difference. I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. But one thing was certain. The woman who once mocked me had finally learned humility. Later that night, as I closed up the house, I noticed my reflection again, in that same front door glass where it had all begun. The tired eyes were gone. In their place stood a woman who had rebuilt herself from humiliation, heartbreak, and silence. And now, she was helping others do the same. I smiled and whispered. They thought I was poor, but I was rich in everything they couldn't buy. That's what Rachel told me one Saturday evening after our weekly meeting. She'd just landed a job at a local community center. She hugged me, tears in her eyes, and said, "I didn't think anyone would ever listen to me again. You made me believe I still mattered." Those words hit me harder than I expected. Because for most of my life, I'd been the one craving to be heard. Now, somehow, I'd become the voice that reminded others they weren't invisible. I walked home that night under the soft glow of the streetlights, holding that sentence in my mind. You made me believe I could start over. And for the first time, I realized that revenge had never been my real victory. Empowerment was. A few weeks later, a city councilwoman named Linda Morales reached out. She'd read the article about the second door and wanted to meet. We met at a local diner, just two women over coffee, no reporters, no formality. She listened as I talked about how women in our community needed more than charity. They needed opportunity. Linda leaned forward. Would you consider leading a mentorship initiative? The city can fund workshops, entrepreneurship, small business training, that kind of thing. I blinked. Me? Let it. She smiled. You're already doing it, Mary. We just want to help you reach more women. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my old notebook, the same one I'd once filled with business numbers, costs, and client lists. But this time, I started a new page. At the top, I wrote, The Second Door Project, Phase 1. Below it, I listed 10 names. 10 women from our group who were ready to take the next step. 10 women who'd once been broken and were now ready to build. It felt like purpose. Real, living purpose. But even as I was finding new light, the past had one last shadow waiting for me. One morning, I received a message from Jessica. She wanted to meet alone. We met at a quiet cafe. She looked nervous, hands twisting around her cup. Mom, she began softly, I need to tell you something. My mother's been diagnosed with breast cancer. My chest tightened. Oh, Jessica. She didn't want you to know, Jessica continued. But I thought you should. She's been different lately. Quiet. Regretful. I nodded slowly. How bad? Stage 2, she whispered. They caught it early. That night, I couldn't sleep. For years, I'd imagined what I'd say to Diane if she ever needed me. I'd pictured being cold, distant, letting her feel what I once felt. But now, hearing the word cancer, all that anger disappeared. Because deep down, I knew pain like that doesn't need punishment. It already is one. The next morning, I baked a small loaf of banana bread, wrapped it in foil, and drove to her house. When she opened the door, her eyes widened. She looked smaller somehow, frail, with a scarf around her head. What are you doing here? She asked quietly. I heard, I said. I just came to bring you something. She stared at the bread in my hands. Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. You don't have to do this. I know, I said softly. But I want to. We sat in silence for a few minutes on her porch. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't expect forgiveness. I shook my head. You already got it. The day I walked away. She looked down. I was jealous of you, you know. You had strength I didn't understand. I spent my whole life trying to look perfect, and you just were. That moment, it broke me. Not out of pity, but out of understanding. I reached over, touched her hand gently, and said, Diane, we both spent years pretending. Maybe it's time we stop. She nodded, her lips trembling. I'm sorry, Mary. For everything. I know, I said. And I mean it, I forgive you. As I drove home, I cried, not out of sadness, but release. Because forgiving her didn't make me weak. It made me free. When I walked through my door, I saw the reflection again. My face in the glass, the same way this story had started. Back then, I saw defeat. Now I saw peace. Over the next few months, Diane started attending our Saturday meetings. Quiet at first, then slowly opening up. She shared her story, the mistakes, the pride, the loneliness. And somehow, the women who once would have hated her listened with compassion. Rachel hugged her one day and said, We've all been her at some point, just lost in different ways. That's when I realized something deeper. Women don't just need empowerment. They need each other. A year later, the Second Door Project became an official nonprofit organization. We hosted workshops, provided microloans for women starting small businesses, and partnered with local schools to teach young girls financial literacy. During our first public event, the mayor gave me an award for outstanding community leadership. When they called my name, I walked up to the stage, and from the crowd, I saw Diane standing, clapping with tears in her eyes. For the first time, her applause wasn't out of politeness. It was respect. When I got home that night, I sat on my porch, holding that small award. It wasn't made of gold or silver, just glass. But it reflected the light beautifully. I thought of every door that had closed in my face. Every insult. Every humiliation. Every silent tear. And then I whispered to the night. This was never about revenge. It was about becoming the woman I was always meant to be. That's what Diane said to me the night of our first fundraising gala for the Second Door Project. It was held in the same hotel ballroom where, years ago, she and Greg had hosted Ethan and Jessica's wedding rehearsal dinner. The night I'd been quietly laughed at for my simple dress and homemade cookies. Funny how life brings you full circle. But this time, the chandeliers didn't make me nervous. The crowd wasn't judging me. They were applauding me. I stood near the entrance, greeting guests, business owners, community leaders, young women from our mentorship program. And then I saw her. Diane, wearing a plain navy gown, no diamonds, no entourage, just quiet dignity. She walked toward me, holding a small white envelope. When she reached me, she smiled, a bit shyly. I made a donation, she said softly, for the women you help. I looked down at the envelope. It wasn't the size that mattered, it was the gesture. Thank you, I said. That means more than you think. She nodded, eyes glistening. You know, I never thought I'd look up to you. But I do now. Her words didn't carry guilt this time, only honesty. And for the first time, I believed her. During my speech that night, I didn't talk about Diane or revenge. I talked about every woman who had been underestimated, mocked, or silenced. I said, sometimes life pushes you so low that standing back up feels impossible. But that's when you realize you were never on the ground. You were just gathering strength. The room went quiet. Then came applause, loud, genuine, overwhelming. And in the crowd, I saw Ethan and Jessica standing, cheering with tears in their eyes. It wasn't a victory speech. It was closure. After the event, I stepped outside for some air. The night was cool, the city lights reflected off the glass doors behind me. And there she was again, Diane, standing beside me. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Of course." "When I was sick," she said slowly, "I kept thinking about that day we first met, how cruel I was. I told Greg later that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to make it right. I stayed quiet, letting her talk. She continued, "You showed me what grace really looks like. You didn't just fight back, you built something better." I turned to her, smiling faintly. "That's what women do, Diane. We build, even from ashes." She nodded. "You built me too." That night, as I drove home, I passed through the same neighborhood where I used to clean offices and count pennies to make rent. The streetlights looked different now, brighter somehow, even though they were the same. Because I wasn't driving home in shame anymore. I was driving home in peace. A few days later, the Second Door Project got a call from a corporate foundation offering a long-term grant. They wanted to fund our expansion, more cities, more women, more opportunities. I met with their representative. She said, "Your story inspired our board. We want to partner with you nationally." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I said the only words that came to mind. "Let's open more doors." That night, I called Ethan. When he answered, I could hear Jessica laughing in the background, their little boy squealing. "Mom, you're on speaker," he said. "Hey," I said, smiling. "Guess what? The project's going national." Jessica gasped. "That's incredible." Ethan said, "You're unstoppable." I laughed. "No, just persistent." Then I heard my grandson's tiny voice say, "Grandma strong." And that was the moment that undid me. Because no award, no grant, no revenge could ever compare to hearing those two words. Later that night, I sat alone in my living room with the lights off, the city faint outside my window. On the coffee table sat three things. The newspaper article that started it all, the glass award from the mayor, and Diane's letter of apology. I traced my fingers across them one by one, whispering the truth I'd learned through every pain and triumph. Empowerment isn't a destination. It's a decision to rise again, even when no one believes you will. Before going to bed, I checked my messages. There was one new email from Rachel. The subject line read, "My first paycheck, thank you." The body said only this, "You taught me how to walk again when life broke my legs. I'll never forget you." I smiled through tears. Maybe that's all we really leave behind. The people we help stand when we finally stop kneeling. When I turned off the lamp, I caught one last glimpse of my reflection in the mirror by the door. It wasn't the woman Diane once mocked. It wasn't even the woman who fought back. It was the woman who healed. That's what Linda, the councilwoman, told me a year after the Second Door Project went national. We were standing backstage at a women's conference in Houston, waiting for me to give a talk. She turned to me with that confident smile and said, "You don't even realize what you've done, do you?" I laughed softly. "I just told my story." She shook her head. "No, you lived it, and that's what makes it powerful." I didn't know what to say, because in that moment, I realized something. The pain that once silenced me had become my platform. When I walked on stage, the room filled with hundreds of women, business owners, students, mothers, survivors. I looked at them and thought of every version of myself I'd been. The broke widow, the humiliated mother, the quiet fighter, the survivor, and finally, the leader. I took a deep breath and began. I used to think power meant having money, titles, or influence. But I learned that power is simpler. It's saying no more when the world tries to keep you small. The audience went silent. Every face was listening, really listening. I told them about Diane, without names. About humiliation that turned into clarity. About revenge that evolved into redemption. And then I ended with this. Every woman here has a door that closed on her. But that doesn't mean the story ends there. Sometimes the second door isn't given. You build it yourself. The applause was thunderous. I saw women crying, nodding, standing. It wasn't fame. It was connection. After the talk, as I stepped off the stage, a young girl, maybe 19, stopped me. She said, "I came here because my mom made me. I didn't think stories like yours were real. But now, I want to start my own business." I smiled, held her hands, and said, "Do it. And when they tell you you can't, just remember, you already did by believing." That moment reminded me of Ethan when he was little, holding my hand and saying, "We're gonna make it, right, Mom?" And I always said yes, even when I didn't believe it. Months passed. Life moved on. The Second Door Project had offices in 3 states. Rachel ran one of them. Diane volunteered every week, helping with event planning. Cancer had changed her. And somehow we'd found peace not as enemies, but as women who finally understood each other. Sometimes she'd stop by my office just to chat. One day, she brought me a photo, the 2 of us at the first gala, standing side by side. "I keep one too," she said quietly. "It reminds me how far I had to fall to finally stand up straight." I smiled. "That's the thing about rock bottom, Diane. It makes a solid foundation." One night, I visited Ethan's home. My grandson ran into my arms shouting, "Grandma's here." Jessica hugged me and said, "He told his class about you today. He said his grandma helps people fix their lives." I laughed. "That's a pretty good job description." Ethan poured us coffee and said, "You know, Mom, I've been thinking, maybe one day, I'll take over the company." I looked at him surprised. "You sure?" He nodded. "You built it for me, even when I didn't know. I think it's time I build on it for you." I didn't cry then. But later, when I was alone in the car, I did. Because hearing that was the real reward. Not money. Not success. Legacy. Weeks later, I finally took a vacation, my first real one in years. Just me, a small cabin near the ocean and quiet. I brought one box with me, a small wooden one that held everything from my journey. The cookie basket ribbon from that humiliating first meeting. Ethan's childhood photo. The letter from Diane. The newspaper clipping about the Second Door Project. And the keys to my first office, rusted but precious. I sat by the shore, holding those keys, and realized. Every door that closed pushed me here, to the woman I became. As the sun set, I thought back to Diane's first insult. "You should have told us your mother's just a poor old lady." I smiled and whispered to the waves. Yes, I was poor once, but never small. Because I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't acting naive or hiding my worth. I was living proof that dignity can be rebuilt, power can be quiet, and forgiveness is the final act of strength. When I returned home, I hung a new sign above my office door. Built, not broken. Every woman who walked through smiled when they saw it. Some cried. Some stood taller. And every time I passed it, I remembered, that door wasn't just for me. It was for every woman who'd ever been underestimated. I looked one last time at my reflection in the glass door, older now, grayer, wiser. I didn't see a victim. I didn't see a widow. I didn't see a businesswoman. I saw a builder. A mother. A woman who stopped asking for respect and created it. And with that, I turned off the lights, locked the door, and whispered, "If you were me, what would you have done?" Comment below.